of the Gemara, the importance of the Gemara. We learned yesterday in Shabbos the importance of Torah, that Torah has a tremendous benefits far beyond our comprehension, both physically and spiritually. In the Torah, there are different degrees of what is more choshev, what is more important. And for that, I call your attention, first of all, to Gemara and Bava Metzia. Here you have copies of Bava Metzia. Take it right there. Everybody got enough copies for everybody. Pass on. You got a copy for everybody. And this is a Gemara we've covered many times in the past, and I call your attention to it on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, Gemara that we've learned many times in the past. In the Shas Gemara.
Just before Mafkid.
Yeah. At the end of the second Perik above Metzia, Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. You have it? Fine. Leonard, you got it?
No.
Lamed Gimel is, were you way in the back? No, it's got to be...
Page 64, 65.
Fine. He'll go down about, turn around about four lines from the bottom.
It's a different Gemara. It's in Perik Sheni.
4 lines from the bottom, and the middle line, turn around, and our rabbis learn. It may be abbreviated, it's all fresh. Turn around, and our rabbis learn. For Oskim and Mikra, if a person engaged in learning Mikra is as explained as what you call Tanakh, what we call the 24 books of the Kisei HaKodesh, the Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, that's Tanakh. The person just engages in learning Mikra, which is not terrible. You get Chusim because you're learning Torah. Midah ve'eno midah. The Gemara describes this as a standard, but it really isn't much of a standard because you can't make too much progression in your capacity to learn Torah, because it builds up your vocabulary, Baruch Hashem, and you get some kind of a yediyah, understanding of the various things that are quoted in the Gemara and everything, but
It also it helps you with the Musar.
you get some musar, some you learn, but you don't learn too much, and it's not recommended except for beginners. In other words, if a person's starting to learn, this is where you start to learn with something that's easier, obviously. You don't start with the most difficult thing, you work yourself up. So it's a standard, but it's not much of a standard in building up your capacity to learn deep. The Mishnah, if you learn Mishnayos, that's a higher standard. Mishnayos, you learn out halachas and everything. It's a midah, it's a standard, we're not going to allow schar. And you get some kind of reward on it because it develops you in the capacity to start reasoning out some of the reasoning that is necessary in order for a Jew to be knowledgeable about what the halacha is. But it still doesn't tell you all the ramifications of halacha, so therefore it's very dangerous to paskin a shaila just looking mishnayos. As a matter of fact, it's not. And then Gemara, if you learn Gemara, you have a little samach, that means the halacha is like that. And there's no greater standard than this. Gemara means the reasoning. If you have things that appear to be in two separate places and contradicting one another, and you try to reason and understand why is this different than this, or if they are both saying something, it's a distinction, and you have to know the reasoning behind it. Now, once you understand the reasoning behind any particular halacha, then you can decide a question of halacha in a proper way. But if you don't understand the reasoning behind it, it is foolhardy to even to attempt to try to make a decision on a question of halacha. And that's the reason why a person that has not the capacity to learn the Gemara and understand how to learn the Gemara and the reasoning behind the Gemara, such a person is certainly not qualified to be a posek, a person that decides questions of halacha. You understand? Because the Shulchan Aruch is based on the Talmudic literature and on the Gemara's reasoning. You understand? So I just wanted to call your attention to this. Now, we have a Gemara in Shabbos that we've learned many times before that tells us that there are certain questions that God will ask a person after 120 years when they go to Olam Emes. And one of the questions is, have you made progression in your Torah wisdom? And this is a requirement for every Jew, not only to learn Torah, but to try to progress in his capacity to learn Torah. Now I've seen, and I'm not, I'm not being in any way critical. I've seen Jews that go to Yishul, and Halavai, they should go more, and they sit at a shir, and the Rav or whoever's saying the shir says the shir, and they listen to a shir, they listen 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they still can't make a link. They can't learn for themselves. All they can do is hear what the Rav says, which is really, when you consider the amount of potential you could have if you really got to the point where you yourself could go and learn, it seems a waste of a tremendous amount of energy that could be utilized to a much higher degree. Now, why is it so choshev, or why is it so important to learn Gemara? For that, I want to learn with you what we've learned before in the past, a few years ago, maybe perhaps some of you have forgotten some of the concepts, a medrash, which I am going to read now to you, and I'm going to translate. Though it's written in English, it's not, of course. It's written in Hebrew and Aramaic. And Medrash Tanuma, and the third paragraph in Parshas, these are the generations of Noah. May his name of the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, be blessed. He has chosen Israel over all the 70 nations of the world. As it is said that the portion of God is His people, Yaakov is His portion of His inheritance. And He has given us the Torah that was written, that it has all kinds, in the written Torah there are hints and hidden things that we cannot understand what they mean. And we have to go to its explanation, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, that's the Gemara and the Midrashim and everything, to understand, in fact, what it means. And it revealed that to Israel. And not only that, the Torah that's written, that now everything is written, but at the time it was the Tanakh was written, it has it's just general rules of the halacha, and the Torah Sheba'al Peh are the specific. So therefore, generally speaking, have general rules without the specific. And the Torah Sheba'al Peh, in fact, is very broad. Now, if you ever look in the Gemara, you see how the material is, and the Midrashim, it covers such a tremendous wide thing, wide spectrum. And it's very broad indeed, and the Torah that is written is relatively, in relation to that, very small indeed. And in relation to the Torah Sheba'al Peh, it is said it is broader than the earth and wider than the ocean. And this is a quote from the book of Job in the 11th chapter. And and it says also there in the book of Job. Incidentally, the book of Job was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, according to the Gemara in Bava Basra. In the 28th chapter of the book of Job, it says, "You will not find in the land of the living." So that's very cryptic. You won't find this in the land of the living. Torah Sheba'al Peh, or the Talmud. So the Medrash Tanchuma asked that question. What does it mean that you won't find it in the land of the living? Are you going to find it in the land of the dead? So he says, no, you won't find the Torah Sheba'al Peh. You won't find the Talmudic, the Gemara, by someone that seeks pleasures of the world. By one that has passion, he wants to fill up his passion, he wants honor, he wants to be accorded greatness in this world. You won't find that capacity among such people. But who will you find the capacity to be able to learn Gemara? Among those that actually almost literally kill themselves on it. Because you don't get to the capacity to learn Gemara unless you really put in the effort and the time. Nobody's going to do it for you. You can expose yourself to listening to a shir, as I say, for 20, 30, 40 years of being Chachmanis, and at the end of that time you still can't make a name. It's a pathetic waste of potential, because if these Talmudim could in turn learn and make a learning, they in turn could teach others. But as it is, they're always in a position where they cannot teach anybody else anything. And it is not really a proper way for a Jew to live. A Jew must make progression. All right, so it goes further. As it says here, how do we know this? Because we have a passage in Bamidbar, Yutes, it says, a man, a person, when they die in a tent, that means a person when they're actually putting so much time into it that they're always learning. They're always learning. I don't want to say that I'm much of an example of that, but I recall, Baruch Hashem, when my parents brought me to yeshiva, and I would go to yeshiva years, and I was learning, and looked, everybody else, my brothers, everybody else was carving out a career for them, and that was, all I was doing is sitting and learning, you understand? So it looked like the world's passing me by. But you can't get that competence until you put in the time and the effort. There's nobody else who's going to do it for you. So we go further. And so it says is the way of the Torah. He's quoting Brisa in the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avos. You should be prepared to eat bread with salt, which is not much of a diet, and prepared to eat, drink water with a fixed measure, which is not too much of a diet, and you prepared to sleep on the earth. In other words, have very hard ground, and live a life of tsar, of pain. And in the Torah, you should work omel. Omel means you should work hard, learning Torah. In other words, putting aside all the pleasures of Olam Hazeh and concentrating upon building up your capacity to learn Torah. Because, now look, this is what the Medrash tells us. The Holy One, blessed He, did not make a covenant with the Jews only on the Torah Sheba'al Peh, only by virtue of the Gemara, not by virtue of any other part of the Torah. Because it says, Ki al pia devorim leila, on the mouth of these things I cut with you a covenant. It says in Shemos Lamed Aleph. And our sages of blessed memory say, God doesn't write in the Torah in order for these things, and not because of these things, and not as a consequence of these things, but al pi hadaborim, through the mouth of these. And this is a hint that this is referring to Torah Sheba'al Peh. This is the Medrash Tanchuma says, that it is very difficult to learn. No, nobody's going to tell you that it's easy. No way in the world. You can be learning Gemara for 20, 30 years. You can still reach a part of the Gemara that it is difficult. Nobody in the world can say it's not difficult. After learning for 30 years, it's still difficult. How much more so if a person just beginning to learn? There's no way in the world that you can pretend it's not difficult. I recall I was learning a Gemara a few years back, and frankly, I didn't know how to learn the plain meaning of what I was learning. And I didn't know how to learn it. I could learn it one way, or I could learn it another way, and I didn't know how to learn it. So what did I do? I took the Aruch HaShulchan as a posting, and I saw the way he paskins the halacha, the way he decided the question of halacha. I got his outcomes, and from his conclusion, I determined that that's the way I have to learn it, the way he came to the conclusion. And after I came to the conclusion, later on, I was still continuing my investigation. I found the Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, was learning Pshat just the way he paskins the halacha. So thanks God, I persisted. So I learned from there a very valuable lesson, that you're never supposed to assume that you can always automatically, easily understand everything in the Gemara. Yes, I will, in all humility, I have told you over the years that I don't ask you that you should make a layman the first thing you start learning. The first thing you should do is try to go and make the Sedra. Make the Sedra each week. The Sedra, Shnai Mikro Echotargum, Brachas, if you do that, God bless you with a long life. That's something we can use, thanks God. And among the things is, once you have a long life, you have opportunity to time to put in what you need. And in Memela, when you're learning the Sedra, besides doing a mitzvah, you also are becoming acquainted conversant with, and the Aramaic, the Targum. So Memela, it begins to build up in you vocabulary, and then you are in a position to go further into Mishnayos and finally Gemara. And then you can learn. There's no reason in the world that you cannot learn. Nobody can persuade me that fully grown people cannot learn Torah. If at the age of 10 years old, Shmuel could go and learn Rashi, at the age of 55, he can't learn Rashi. It doesn't make sense. He hasn't lost it. All right. Emes, you remember?
Yes, that's Emes. But what was my life at age 10 is not like my life at age 4.
Well, you have a few more problems now.
Yeah, I had an open mind. I had nothing
to do. The difference is that now you're a grown person and you have the maturity and the experience.
Yeah, I can understand.
Yeah, much. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's go further. Now the Medrash the Medrash Chuma continues. Even though it's very difficult to learn, nobody's fooling anybody, and there is great sorrow, great pain, because sometimes you beat your brains out about it. It separates the men from the boys. You understand? I recall I was learning in the yeshiva year after year, the Beis Rachmanis, and it was difficult. No way. I would always have to go and learn with word by word, phrase by phrase, and then when I thought I knew it, I had to go over it many times until it started flowing in my mind. And then when I really thought I knew it, I chanced on a strategist. I'd take somebody else that didn't know it and try to explain it to them. If I couldn't explain it to him, it's a sign I really didn't know it. And that's why I went to Seder. I was doing. And I recall many times I was learning Gemara, I would review and review. I reviewed the Gemara so many times while I was learning that it would flow from my mouth, just like you say Ashrei. It would flow, no problem. I recall once I was sitting in the Beis Medrash and I was learning Cheskas Sabat in the 3rd Perik in Bava Basra. And I was saying it, and I was saying with such a fluency that somebody just heard me. He says, I know you know that Gemara. He didn't even ask me any questions about it. He knew the way I was saying it that I knew it. And it was only because of constant repetition to the point where that's not easy. In the first place, you have to put aside the pleasures of the moment. You got to concentrate upon it, and you got to keep on concentrating on it. And the Torah, our Chazal tell us, the Torah is a very fluctuating situation. The knowledge of the Torah does not rest with anybody if they take their attention away from it. If you don't concentrate and constantly keep on learning, the Torah that you learn evaporates from you. And before, you just turn around and look over. It's something like it's just like the sun, something to do, and it's no longer. So it requires a tremendous, constant application, and that's great power. It's something that you can, once you learn it, and you can sort of put it away, and you know it. You can learn it all the time. Fine, good. But this is not that nature. Fortunately, thanks God, as you persist and keeping on learning, I'm just talking my own experience, God gives you a remembrance that a lot of times you can remember things, Gemaras that you learned maybe 20, 30 years ago. You may be learning other yonim, and you can still say it. And you understand? That is, thanks God, a gift from God. If you persist in learning enough, God will eventually give you the Torah as a gift, and it will eventually sink in. But it requires that you have emunah. You should have faith in God, and you put in the time and effort. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm talking to people that are mature people, and you've lived out a portion of your life. Halavai should be a short portion, and you should live much more longer. And you should have more opportunities to learn. But I am putting this challenge to you. If you don't learn, nobody's going to do it for you. Now let's go further. In the Medrash Tanchuma, the tsar that you have, and the pain that you have in learning Torah Shabbat Peh, that's the Talmud, the Gemara, it's comparable to darkness. The people that walk in darkness, they will see a great light. These are now the Bali HaTalmud that are learning Talmud. Sharo or Godo, they see the great light, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ner Eineiha, illuminate their eyes, the Isur v'Heter, and what is prohibited and what is permissible. The Tomei v'Tahara, the Torah, what is, in other words, the fruit of this tremendous labor is that you get to the point that you can paskin a halacha in a proper way, ma'amiti. There's no such tremendous fruit as paskin halacha. We have in the beginning of the Balaturim, in the section talking about Dayonim, the beginning of Dayonim, says that if a person learns Torah to the point that he can paskin halacha in a proper way, he is in fact a partner with God in creation of the world. And it says further, and in the future to come, those that love God this way will be like the going out of the sun with its greatness. Shoftim, the 5th chapter. They will have the great, it will be illuminating, a tremendous illumination, how wonderful God will treat such people that engage in such activities. And the Jewish people, now he goes further, Medrash says, the Jewish people did not accept the Torah until God put over them the mountain like a barrel. Remember we learned that yesterday. And they were standing underneath the mountain. And Radini, Barachama said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One must speak to Israel, if you accept the Torah, Mutav will be good. Im Lav, if not, Sham Tehei Klurasachem, there will be your graves. In other words, the choice of accepting the Torah or not is not a choice between a luxury and a necessity, but it's a mamash, the choice between life and death. And if it would say that because in order that the Jewish people would accept the written Torah, Torah Shabbat, that God had put the mountain over them, that couldn't possibly be referred to that. Why? Because we have that we know that they in fact accept that when they said to them when they received the Torah, they all answered together, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. So that wasn't accepted. There was no necessity for any.
No, he just said
Na'aseh v'nishma. Yeah, Na'aseh v'nishma, because there is not too much toil involved or pain involved in acquiring knowledge of. I'm not saying that it's not kosher, that it's not much, and it's really small at times, that's difficult, but it's not impossible. And that is really a little in relation to the other. But what are we talking about? The Medrash Tanchuma says we're talking about the Torah Shabbat Peh. That's why God had to force the issue. Because these are the specifics of the lesser commandments and the more strict commandments. And this is very strong like death, and very difficult like the grave to acquire. There's nobody in the world who becomes a Ben Torah in the true sense of the word that doesn't put in the effort and the time. And don't let anybody fool you in assuming that it's an easy task. Because you don't learn it, the only one that learns this is a person that truly loves God with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might. As it says in this Kriya Shema, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Now, hear what the Medrash Tanchuma is saying. The Medrash Tanchuma says the only way you can fulfill this particular mitzvah, and this is a mitzvah in the Torah, to love the God, is that you're prepared to put in the time and the effort in learning Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Gemara. Now I found, why? How do you know that this love only is the language of the Talmud? Because see what it says afterwards. And these things will I command you today shall be upon your heart. And what is this? This is the Talmud. It's upon the heart, that's in the intellect. Because you remember, the Talmud is the understanding, the reasoning behind all the halacha. And you should go and diligently teach them to your children. And when it means children, doesn't mean necessarily your children, also your students. Zu Talmud shetzorech shinui. This is a Talmud that requires, in other words, in order to learn the Gemara, you got to sit and reason out and understand the reasoning, the ramifications of it. Because cholilu v'cholilu, if a person doesn't know the Talmudic background of a halacha, he can misinterpret and misapply something that appears to him superficially to be just like one halacha, like another, and he can misinterpret it and paskin an improper. To teach you that the Parsha Rishona, the Kriya Shema, is not talking about, there's not mentioned there any reward in Olam Hazeh. If you look through the whole Parsha, the first Parsha of Kriya Shema, you won't find any reward mentioned about Olam Hazeh, as you will find in the second Parsha of Kriya Shema. In the second Parsha of Kriya Shema, you do find there's something of a reward. Hoy im shemoah, tishma'u.